Hi there. Welcome everyone to the Regional Housing Council. Today is December 11th at 4:02 p.m. and we are calling to order and beginning. Thanks for joining us at the meeting here today. As always, we're going to start really quick just with some brief introductions. I'll go ahead and go first. I'm Councilmember Michael Althauser from the city of Tumwater, and I'm joined by Brad Medrud from our planning department as well. I don't believe Councilmember Joan Cathy will be joining us today.
She's there.
She's there. Oh, are you here, Joan? Oh, I'm sorry. You weren't there when I scrolled over a second ago.
That's okay. I wasn't standing up, so not tall enough today.
Right on. Well, thanks for being here. So why don't we, Carolyn, would you mind introducing yourself and who's joining with you?
Yes. Can you all see me okay?
Yep.
All right. I did something weird to my screen here. I'm Carolyn Cox, representing the city of Lacey, and I am joined by the wonderful Ryan Andrews and Jennifer Adams.
Awesome. And Robert, would you mind introducing yourself?
Robert Vanderpool, City of Olympia. I'm here with City Manager Jay Burney and Jacinda. Wherever Jacinda went to, there she is.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And let's see. I don't see Commissioner Klaus. Commissioner Mejia, would you mind doing the introductions for the county?
Yes, Carolina Mejia. I'm the alternate for Thurston County. Commissioner Emily Klaus is at a State Association of Counties new commissioner training, so she will not be able to join us today. With us today, we have our Assistant County Manager, Rob Gilder, as well as Tom Webster, Alex Pierce, Kaven Hill, Leah. Am I missing someone? Elisa Sparkman. Sorry, Lisa. I was like going through the names. Okay, Elisa Sparkman. I apologize. Thank you.
All righty, and I don't see anyone from Yelm has joined us yet. But I'm scrolling back and forth. But we do have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First,
and sorry to interrupt, Chair, but we also have Charlea from our Homeless Services, our Affordable Housing Advisory Board.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you want to introduce yourself, Charlea?
Oh, sure. My name's Charlea. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us today. So with that, I don't think there are any changes to the agenda unless anyone has any to speak of. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and get right into the action items on our agenda today. So first is item number 2, that's approval of our meeting minutes from our November 13th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Sure, I'll move approval.
And is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Cox, seconded by Councilmember Vanderpool. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. So that brings us to public comment. Is anyone registered for public comment online?
There's no registration for public comment. There are 2 people in the attendees if they'd like to raise their hand.
We'll give folks in the attendee section maybe a couple seconds here. If you'd like to offer public comment, you can click the raise hand button. We'd be happy to hear from you if you would like to. No pressure, but
Not seeing any raised.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, speeding right along. Moving into the more, I guess, substantive portion of our action items. Number 4 is the 2025 request for proposal funding overview and set-asides. Tom, I think you're going to help us walk through this one.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen for what's in the agenda packet. So we are getting ready for our 2025 request for proposals. This is a large year for us, a large funding cycle. And so I'm going to walk through, so we have several things for you to approve at today's meeting. So I think this can be fairly efficient, but this is also fairly important. This is a big part of what the our HC does is its funding allocations. And so I'm going to talk through what we know at this point around funding and what assumptions we're making, the set-asides that the advisory boards have approved, and then we're going to, I'll ask you to approve those set-asides. Then I'll ask Kaven talk through the recommendations from the Homeless Services Advisory Board on the priorities and the scoring criteria for their RFP. And then Alex and then Charlea will talk through the affordable housing priorities for both their request for proposals as well as the request for information, which you may recall is separate, is for our pipeline project. So they have two separate processes. So with that, kind of dive into our revenue projections this year. So for our affordable housing funds, we have several different fund sources for affordable housing capital projects. The first one is the Home Investment Partnership Program, which is our federal from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is an entitlement we receive every year. Last year we received, $781,000 is what we had available. This year we're, obviously Congress has not passed the budget yet, so these are certainly projections. Our hope is that we'll be relatively similar to what we've had in previous years. We're projecting a little bit of a decrease. Some of that is program income, which is complicated to explain. But anyway, we're projecting around $700,000 from that fund source. In the past year, we had some home ARP money that was a one-time allocation. We no longer have that. So that's a reduction from what we had available last year as part of the RFP. The 5386, hopefully folks are starting to become familiar with that number. That is the old 2060, which is our document recording fee. A portion of the local document recording fee is set aside for affordable housing projects. Last year we used $225,000 from that. We're projecting a slight decline in our document recording fees this past year. Interest rates have come down a little bit, but not enough where we're seeing a real uptick in refinancings or new home sales. So document recording fees we're projecting to be relatively flat. 1406 is local sales tax retention. That does not have to be returned to the state. So we're projecting that to be essentially flat at around $1.2 million for this year. The local home fund from Olympia. Olympia has projected basically flat, a little bit of a decrease of just over $2 million. And for the county portion of the local home fund, we're projecting $5 million in collections. Of the $5 million, 60% can be used for capital. The other 30% will be allocated to homeless services, and then 10% for administration. So that is about $3 million for local home funds. So all total, that is $7.16 million that is available for affordable housing projects, capital projects. Within that, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has set aside 20% of that amount for the opportunity funds. So this is the set aside to take advantage of those acquisition opportunities that may come available during the year. We've talked about the manufactured home park project. If there's one that comes up for sale, that money would be available to support that, or other acquisition opportunities. This past year, several months ago, you approved the Family Support Center to acquire a piece of property out of this fund. So setting aside that roughly $1.4 million leaves about $5.7 million available to go out into the RFP. As part of that RFP, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has already identified just over $3.5 million in projects that are in the pipeline. These are projects that we anticipate to come in with funding requests this year. The advisory board will review. They still need to review those applications to make sure that those projects are ready to move forward. And so it's possible if a project is not quite ready that amount would be less. But if all those projects come in, that would leave just over $2 million in unallocated funding that is available for affordable housing projects. So let me pause right there and see if there if Alex or Shalai, if you have anything you wanted to add, or if there's any questions on the affordable housing resources we anticipate.
I have a question. If folks, we don't need to like raise hands. Everyone can just sort of speak up if you have questions, because I'm not able to see folks. But so for the set aside for Family Support Center, did we have any carryover from that, or did we use the balance of the 1.47 for that project?
Yeah, so that project was a 1 million project, so there is around 400,000 of carryover that remains in that opportunity fund.
So is that accounted for? How is that accounted for here in the 2025 RFP? Does that mean the opportunity fund becomes 1.8-ish?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
And so I think next year, if that fund gets, at a point where we feel like the advisory board is saying we need to RFP some of those dollars, we don't want that fund to grow too large. But I think at this point, and I looked to Alex or Shalai, there's not been a recommendation to roll that into the RFP. They're looking to maintain that in the opportunity fund at this time.
That's
Okay.
correct.
And those are unrestricted dollars, so they're not time limited for us to take action with.
That's correct.
Okay.
These come from the local home fund bucket of money. So they're not federal dollars. These are local dollars, and they're not correct. They're not time limited.
Okay. Okay. And for the local home fund, can you explain a little bit more about the item in the notes, the 60% of the county collections? Can you remind us what we do with the other 40% of the collections?
Yeah, so of the, and this is within the ordinance, the legislation, that up to 30% of the funds can be used for services activities. And so 30% of the funds you'll see when we talk about the homeless services available will go to homeless services RFP, and then 10% are for administration.
Okay, got it. Great. Any folks have any other questions about this slide?
All right, I will move on to our homeless services revenue projections. And again, these are, I want to estimate or emphasize that these are very much estimates at this point. There is a fair amount, especially with these funds, there's still a fair amount that is unknown, uncertain. So starting off with our consolidated homeless grant that we received from the state. And under the consolidated homeless grant this past year, there's been several kind of different subcategories of funds. And this past year, they had a document recording piece supplemental fund. They have had an emergency housing fund, inflationary funds that you may have talked about. So I've grouped all of those together. They're all under one contract we received from the Department of Commerce. So last year, or kind of for 2024, we received just over $7 million under kind of that contract. The Department of Commerce has notified us that we should anticipate a 20% reduction in funding from the state under this contract. So that is kind of accounts for the roughly 5.6 million in funds kind of under that. So we are anticipating that reduction from the state. What that exact amount looks like will obviously depend on kind of the state legislative session coming out. We probably won't know. I looked at the chair when we might have kind of final budget numbers. Anyone's guess, but so I think as we move into this funding year, this is going to be kind of one of our challenges, is making awards perhaps before we know our final budget numbers from Commerce. We have been told another main source that we receive from the state is the Housing and Essential Needs Program, or HEN. We have been told to expect that funding for the HEN program should remain relatively flat. So we're not anticipating a reduction in HEN funding. So this past year, that was right around $4 million. So that's what we're anticipating for next year. The 5386 is the local document recording fee. Last year, we projected kind of allocated 1.5 million. we were slightly under that in what we actually collected, or obviously we're still getting numbers for November and December. So we're projecting around a 1.3 million, so a slight decrease in that amount. Again, we may, things start to tick up here in the next couple months. We may be able to adjust that number upward if we're seeing kind of trends changing directions. And then the local home fund, that 30% from the 5 million of collections is reflected here in the 1.5 million. And then eviction prevention rent assistance is also another kind of actually under the consolidated homeless grant contract, but I've called that out as a separate line item because it's specifically for rent assistance. We have less flexibility with the use of those funds. Again, projecting a roughly 20% decrease in that funding, which would leave us $1 million. And then the Human Services Fund, which is the local sales tax. We have not reached out to jurisdictions yet. We'll be doing that in January to get your numbers for sales tax. So we'll update that number, but we've projected that to remain relatively flat from last year at around $350,000. So that gives us a subtotal of 13.75 million compared to 15.89 million that we had in 2024. So definitely a decrease in funding that is available. Within that, and we'll talk about set-asides next, we have identified a recommendation of $255,000 in set-asides that would not be included as part of the RFP, which means the RFP will have just about 13.5 million, just a little bit under in available funding. Again, subject to final budget numbers from the state and any adjustments. Before I move on to the set-asides, any questions about those projections?
I have a question about the CHG. So you mentioned it sort of briefly in terms of timing and the session, but so so could there be a scenario where we're awarding funding and projects that we're making these awards prior to sine die in late April?
Potentially, yes. And so what the RFP says and what we have language is that we are making kind of preliminary awards based on estimates. And then before we execute a contract, we would do a proration, if we were off by, 4% of our kind of funds available, then we would, adjust contracts, across the board by 4%. So everyone would take the same increase or cut.
Okay.
Appropriately. So we're going to make those awards or recommendations based on the best available data at that time. But then within the RFP, we say we may need to fine tune those awards based on actual revenue once we have those numbers from the state. Because even after the budget is passed, then Commerce has to run kind of their budgets through and kind of give us those allocations. So sometimes it can take a little bit of time for us to get that information.
Okay. Well, it's not a question so much as a statement, but the need is dire, and this is a challenge that we'll have to try to overcome, and hopefully the legislature can help us out. We'll see. Yep. Does anyone else have other questions or anything about this part of the slide?
Go ahead, Caroline. I don't think he can see your hand.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. Or Robert, sorry.
It's fine.
My question is in regards to the timeline, Tom, of when are we going to find out from the state on how much funding we actually have available, and if it's way less, do we have a contingency plan, or if it's way more, do we have a contingency plan?
Yeah, so again, we usually I want to say kind of roughly, once the state passes their budget and that's finalized, when we know those numbers, we start to get pretty good guesstimates on what that looks like, but it's usually, another 30 or so days after that before Commerce gives us a final number in terms of what our specific allocation is. So I would not be surprised if we're not getting a final number until May or perhaps early June. I don't want to kind of make predictions on kind of what the state legislature timing is going to be. And so I think, you know, if it's within, you know, if our guess is not too far off, then we will just make those award adjustments based on a percentage basis again, allocating up or down. If it's substantially less or substantially more, then I think we'll need to kind of reconvene and have some discussions about whether we have to revise some of those kind of funding decisions, whether consider some new projects if we're pleasantly surprised to have additional money, or have to make some, you know, decisions about you know, things that perhaps cannot be awarded as intended if the funding is much less. So I think at this point, a little bit of a wait and see, and we'll have to kind of cross that bridge if we come to it. But I think as we go through that process, one of the important messages will be to grantees saying that here's a preliminary award, but there's going to, you know, leaving that caveat that until we get the final numbers, there need to be future adjustments.
Is the 20% a conservative estimate? Like, I'm sorry to keep asking this, and I feel like you've gone over this, but where's the 20% at? Where are we getting 20%? Why not 25%? How conservative is this estimate?
Yeah, so this is the number that was told to us by the state. So Department of Commerce reached out and sent an email to all counties and said, anticipate a 20% kind of reduction. So I don't have the insight of where they got their 20% number from. I think primarily the fund source we are looking at is document recording fees. And so, you know, in the past 2 years, they've supplemented a decrease in document recording fees with other revenue sources. And I think they're anticipating they're not going to be able to make up that lost document recording fee revenue elsewhere. And so, so I can't speak specifically to how the state came up with that projection, but that's the number they gave to us.
Any other questions on this slide before we move on to the services set asides? I don't see any hands. Okay.
All right. So for the set asides, we're keeping pretty consistent with set asides that have been done in previous years. And so the first one is for cold and hazardous weather. You know, last year we awarded contracts just over $265,000. And so just projecting a small increase just with inflation and the need for that. So recommending $275,000 for cold and hazardous weather. The point in time count. So these three items that are highlighted are ones that would not be included in the RFP. So we're not asking for applications for those items. The county retains those and issues those as appropriate. All these other set asides still would go through the competitive RFP process for what agency has awarded those funds. We're just indicating that these are things we know we want to spend money on. So the point in time count, we are increasing that ask up to $30,000. It's been $25,000 for the last several years. So we are asking for a slight increase in that. The emergency funds, continuing to fund that at $200,000. Coordinated entry, so we have a coordinated entry system, keeping that flat at $350,000. The housing basic needs, we overfunded that a little bit last year because we had some additional funding available, and so given the anticipated reduction in overall funding, recommending that at $250,000. The Lived Experience Housing Steering Committee, that facilitation, keeping that steady at $50,000. The advisory board stipends up to $25,000, although that will likely be less. And then kind of DEI, in the past we did DEI training. This year is going to be a little more broad in terms of just DEI activities for agencies, projecting that at $30,000. So up to, you know, $5,000 per agency. So those are the set asides for a total of 1.21 million of that, which is pretty similar to kind of what they were last year. And Kaven, as Kaven goes through the funding priorities, he will talk about some of these in a little bit more detail in terms of the specific activities, but this is at the high level, at the funding level. But happy to answer questions.
Great. Any questions from anyone? I don't see any hands. If I'm missing any, please speak up. All right.
And so what we're asking for at this point would be for you to approve the set asides and the RFP estimated amounts of funding to go into the RFP. And sorry, just one more point of clarification. So in the past years, we've done one consolidated RFP, one application where we combine the affordable housing and homeless services together. We do one RFP, one application process. This year, we're splitting those. It'll make it a little easier for the advisory board. So we're going to have a separate RFP specifically for homeless services and a separate RFP specifically for the affordable housing funds. So just a note on that.
Okay. Can you stop the screen share, because we'll now at the point where we can open it up for discussion. All seems pretty straightforward. It's exciting to get the ball rolling on next year's work. Obviously, funds are a challenge, but does anyone have any other questions or thoughts before we take action on the amounts? Well, seeing none, let me scroll down to see if there's I don't think there's a written mode. So is the motion just that we approve the proposal RFP estimates and set asides?
And the set aside, yes.
Okay. Well, I'd entertain a motion to that effect if anyone would like to make one.
I'm happy to make one.
And is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Carolina and seconded by Robert. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to the next item on our agenda, the Homeless Services Advisory Board RFP priorities and scoring criteria recommendations. And Kaven, I think you might help us walk through this one with Tom.
Absolutely. I'm just gonna go ahead and do a screen share as well.
Great.
I promise absolutely no gifts in this one. So this is I'm just sharing from the agenda packet. I've been working with the Homeless Services Advisory Board previously as a chair, but now as a staff member. So I'll just, as I go through the priorities on the scoring criteria, I'll add in just a little bit of additional context where it's necessary, but keep it high level. So what I'm sharing right now is just the homeless services priorities. The advisory board is recommending the Regional Housing Council go along with these priorities that we've come up with for the 2025 awards. A lot of these were set during a retreat that the advisory board had in August. Just trying to, figure out, knowing that we were going to be coming up with less funds this year, putting together our priorities overall. So again, as Tom was stating earlier in the financial breakdown, we do have uncommitted funds, an uncommitted funding priority. We still want to see requests come through with creative programming ideas that support reducing racial disparity within our community. We have been working really hard on reducing those those outcomes for our folks involved in our homeless crisis response system. And we want to continue to see those things happen, especially if they center folks with lived experience as part of the program development. Just keep going in regards to our committed funding priorities. Absolutely, we want to continue to see coordinated entry as a top priority. It's the essential pipeline for supporting our folks actively experiencing homelessness, with getting connected not just with housing and shelter supports, but also with triage while they're accessing those wait lists and support structures. We want to continue to focus on housing basic needs, especially funds assisting folks at 50% below 50% area median income to maintain their current housing situations and prevent loss of housing. So that includes our rent assistance, utility assistance, emergency home repair, fees and deposits to secure housing. We also include diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of this housing basic needs, but it's a separate set aside. I know that when Tom was going over the financials, it says DEI support for training activities, but as an agent, the Homeless Services Advisory Board is really looking at expanding that to further reduce disparities in our system. So we don't want to see it used solely for training, because that was a little bit hard to track outcomes for. We'd like to see it used a little more creatively as well. Still will fund training, but want to see that go a little further this time around, but we still want to prioritize that. The Lived Experience Steering Committee, of course. It's in its third year now, going into its fourth year. It continues to expand and continues to give direct feedback to our community providers and all parts of our homeless crisis response system. We want to continue to see cold weather shelter prioritized, as well as hazardous weather shelter. Both of those contribute to preventing an exasperation of conditions for folks who are experiencing homelessness. Eviction prevention rental assistance, a priority there. Also as part of housing basic needs. I want to note that the county does intend to contract with a lead agency who will be responsible for implementing the EPRA program, similar to how we do coordinated entry now, where Family Support Center is the lead agency for coordinated entry, and they subcontract with Community Youth Services. Homeless services funds for basic needs. We want to prioritize that for food and meals assistance, childcare, personal hygiene, emergency needs. We also included shelter support as a fifth option. I know we have housing and basic shelter as its own set aside, but can under basic needs services fund, we're considering it there as well. Shelter support activities that seek to remove barriers to folks accessing housing or becoming eligible. And I'll stop there for questions before continuing on to criteria.
So that sheltering support, that's new, right? That's why that's
Yes.
in red. We haven't done that before. That's great.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone have any questions so far? Should we continue on?
I guess I do want to kind of jump in, and one clarification is because we didn't have a specific set aside in what I talked through for the basic needs. So the funding that we have under the Human Services Fund will all go to basic needs. So that $350,000. So it wasn't a separate set aside. It's really that fund source will be used for the basic needs funding. So I wanted to kind of clarify that, because there wasn't a separate set aside for it. It's really, we've allocated that Human Services Fund funding to go for this activity. So I just wanted to clarify that if there's questions.
Great. Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. I think we can continue on.
All right. So I'll just go over the scoring criteria for how the Homeless Services Advisory Board plans to score RFP applications. We'll score them by, I think we have a total of nine criteria. First is importance to the community. If they are a LESC applicant, if they're applying to do support for the Lived Experience Steering Committee, that's the 1A. So they won't get 25 for importance to the community and then 25 for applying to be the Lived Experience Housing Steering Committee carrier. So that's the 1A. We'll score them on project design, clearly defined scopes, cost effectiveness, partnerships and collaboration. Is really important to us. We increased the scoring cost, or the scoring there, just based off of how important it is for community partners to be able to collaborate with each other, especially knowing that we may have less funding coming in. Supporting vulnerable and historically disadvantaged populations, financial capacity, they're just responding to the actual questions. And then here in red, project is low barrier and housing first. We increased that from 5 points to 10 points and changed it from being a question that will be scored as a yes or a no to a question that will be scored on a scale. We recognize that we have a lot of different projects within our community. Some of them, just based off of federal guidelines, are a bit more restrictive. So we're going to score, or the advisory board will score on a scale as opposed to yes or a no in regards to how low barrier a project is. And then, of course, under administrative score, just past compliance with audits, regarding audits. Any questions?
What's an example of something that is low barrier but is not low barrier enough to get 10? Like, isn't it just you are or you aren't, or are there specific like different little types of policies that could interfere with the effectiveness of how low barrier or how housing first? Like if they don't take dogs, for like, you can't bring a pet or you can't bring a partner or something, like, are there sub policies that sort of impact why someone would get less than 10 but more than 5?
Yeah, you certainly mentioned a couple. No dogs, no partners. No partners is a pretty big one. A lot of code of conduct that we've seen in the community does not allow for visitors. We find that to be something that increases the barriers to housing for some folks, because they will not accept. We've seen that they won't accept housing if they're not allowed to have visitors or be housed with their partners. Another example might be that a person can't be actively experiencing substance use disorder, sobriety restrictions. We've seen that. We've seen code of conduct that isn't harm reductive in the sense of how people might be experiencing psychosis. Yeah, those are just some examples. Really, we expect that based off of the questions for the RFP, folks will submit their code of conduct and eligibility requirements for their programs, and we'll use those to also determine if a project is low barrier, and if so, how low barrier they are, if they're not going by housing low barrier or housing first policies.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions for the criteria here? I don't see any hands. Okay.
We'll stop
Just
sharing.
a quick comment, if I could, Michael. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Oh, sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, that's because my camera was off. Sorry. I just want to compliment the work of this group. And this is fantastic. So nicely done, Kaven and team.
Make sure that they get that back. It's been many months. At this point, they're on 2 years. They're doing their first terms ending. They've gelled really nicely together, and they're a group of individuals who deeply care about this community. So thank you, and I'll make sure they hear that.
Great.
There we go. It's muted. So this is one we also take action on to approve, correct? Okay. Sorry. Also, if you hear any background noise, it's my dog that's whining because I haven't thrown the tennis ball that's at my feet for a little while. It's not my stomach being hungry, so I apologize if you hear that. Are there any other questions before we take action?
No, this is great. I think this is fantastic. I have looked at much criteria around many different policies, and it is not as good and thorough as this. So good stuff.
Yeah, well said. Well, I suppose with that, we would entertain a motion to approve the Homeless Service Advisory Board RFP priorities and scoring criteria recommendations, if anyone would like to make a motion.
So move.
And is there a second?
Second.
It's a motion by Robert and seconded by Carolyn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Great. Thanks so much for your presentation, Kaven. That brings us to our next item on the agenda, the Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board RFP priorities and scoring criteria recommendations. And I think, Alex, you might be helping us walk through that.
Yes, it's me.
Awesome.
Thank you. I will also share my screen. So my name is Alex Purse. I'm the Affordable Housing Program Manager for Thurston County, but I'm also a staff liaison alongside Jacinda Stelches from the City of Olympia to the Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board. So over the past 2 meetings, October and November, our advisory board met to discuss the RFP preference or priorities and scoring criteria, as well as the RFI, so RFP request for proposals for 2025 capital projects, and the RFI is the request for information for the capital project pipeline for 2028. So I'll start with the 2025 capital projects RFP. The advisory board is recommending to the Regional Housing Council to consider all applications that are eligible under the various available funding sources and to not set additional funding priorities for the 2025 request for proposals. However, in addition to recognizing the importance of continued development of affordable housing within the urban core of Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey, the board would like to encourage development in rural Thurston County outside of those 3 large jurisdictions. So therefore, they'd like to convey a preference for projects that will occur in these rural areas outside of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater. We do have the chair of our board here and Jacinda, so I'll also let them step up if they would like to speak to the conversation around this decision. But generally, this topic included discussion on the ability of jurisdictions to meet the development requirements of the Growth Management Act, and also taking into consideration location of projects that are currently scheduled for the 2025 capital project pipeline, which are largely located in the urban core. So in addition to this above preference, the TAHAB has made edits to scoring criteria, which are noted in red here. This one in criteria number 1 specifically calls out the special consideration for projects in rural areas or outside. They're defining that as outside of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater. And then lastly, in section 5, there was conversation around adding veterans to supporting vulnerable and historically disadvantaged populations, and also this language around reducing racial disparity and to reduce discrimination. If anybody else from my board would like to step up and speak. or if there are any questions.
I'll just add that the board has discussed prioritizing certain styles or certain ways of providing affordable housing or shelter, et cetera, but find that we kind of end up agreeing that we just need more, and any strategy that is effective and creative is welcome.
Any other questions about this one from folks? Okay. Should we go ahead and go to the RFI as well, Alex, and then we can do it?
I think that's up to you. We need a motion, I believe, on both, so however you would like to do that.
Okay, why don't we go, just so that I don't get confused, why don't we go off from screen share and then we can do a motion on
Okay,
that one? Just so I don't lose track of
that
things.
makes sense. That's great. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions for this one. I think this is also really great work. It's also just exciting for these things to get off the ground too. But I would entertain a motion that we approve the Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board RFP priorities and scoring criteria recommendations. If there's a motion.
Motion.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay. There's a motion by Robert and seconded by Carolina. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes. Great. So the next is the RFI. Alex, are you helping us walk through that one now too?
Yes.
Great.
Okay. So similar to the RFP, the advisory board met to discuss priorities for the RFI. So our last year, the board selected projects to be put on the capital pipeline for years 2025, 2026, and 2027. So this year, the request for information will go out for the year of 2028. So the advisory board is recommending to the RHC to establish 2 priorities for the 2028 capital project pipeline request for information. Number 1 is prioritize projects that serve households with incomes at or below 50% AMI, area median income, and to prioritize projects that will occur outside the city of Olympia. So background on this decision, the advisory board established the intent of establishing the priority that supports households below 50% AMI was due to the fact that many of the projects currently in the pipeline for years 2025 to 2027 are serving populations up to 80% AMI. They decided and discussed that there was a need of lower income housing for compliance of the Growth Management Act, and they wanted to encourage and prioritize development of housing for populations earning less than 50% AMI. They also identified the increased need for affordable housing projects outside the city of Olympia. Although it was very important to continue supporting the affordable housing within the city, many of the projects currently scheduled on the pipeline will occur in the pipeline, so the board wanted to encourage development in other jurisdictions throughout the region. Similar to the last scoring criteria, the adjustments have been made in red. The advisory board decided to add the priority here as criteria number 1A into allot 5 points to that, meeting that condition or meeting a priority in the point scale. And then they also added this additional language in criteria number 5 for veterans and reducing discrimination. Justin and Charlotte, if y'all have anything to add.
Seeing none. I do have a question about the 1A. So how it works with the 5 points is if it's in a different jurisdiction, then that's sort of the floor you have towards meeting community need. Like that guarantees that you have 5 if it's outside, because we're identifying that as being an element of community need. Doesn't mean you
Yes.
could get 25 in that category, but it helps you meet the 20.
So if it's an importance to a community, just generally like the project aligns with, you know, other important, I don't know, if the project aligns with other needs that are in the community as, you know, decided by the reviewer and set by the advisory board, then they could get up to 20 points. But then if it also meets a priority, one of the 2 priorities, then they would also get additional 5 points. So if the proposal does not meet a priority, they would get 0 points for that. So they're separated out.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I think we can go off the screen share.
Okay.
It'll be easier to see hands there anyway. But seeing none, I guess I would entertain a motion that we approve the request for information priorities and scoring criteria recommendations.
So moved.
And is there a second? Motion by Carolyn and seconded by Robert. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The motion passes. Awesome. That's great. And also just thank you to both of our advisory boards. There's so many hours that go into completing these and getting these ready. It's really tremendous work. It's exciting that we're here. That now brings us to the communications update. And Elisa, I think you're gonna help us walk through that one.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Elisa Sparkman, the communications specialist for the Regional Housing Council and for Thurston County Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention. And I have one quick and exciting update. The county has finalized the software for the newsletter, and the plan has been that we're going to start a regional housing newsletter, and we had planned to start it this year, but weren't able to with the new software. It wasn't quite acquired, and it's kind of a process, but now we have it, and Public Health and Social Services is piloting the new software, so we'll be able to start the Regional Housing Council newsletter next year.
That's great.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great news. All right, thanks so much. That takes us to the retreat update. Tom?
Yeah, thanks. Just a brief update after last month's discussion where we talked about kind of an interest in having a half-day retreat sometime in maybe late spring to really focus on this question of the RHC's role around kind of policy-related issues. So had good discussion last week, and the tech team has some charges to start thinking about preparing for that. So the tech team had a 2-hour in-person meeting yesterday where we really started to dive into that and started thinking about what could be on a work plan for the RHC and what are the policy elements, and trying to frame that in such a way that we can present something at a retreat that will help kind of move the conversation forward. So at this point, we have some additional work to do identifying a facilitator. So have some potential names, but if your jurisdiction has used a facilitator in the past that you think would be good, please kind of either send those to me or to your tech team representative. We'll be moving forward with identifying a facilitator. And then also kind of just putting together that agenda. So hope to have more information to bring to you in January as we move forward with the retreat. So we've made some initial progress, but don't have anything specific to bring to you this month. Just know that we are working on it, having good discussions. And I am also looking at our budget internally. My hope, with no promises at this point, but my hope is that through the local home fund admin, that the county has sufficient resources to pay for that facilitation. And there will not need to be a donation from each jurisdiction toward that. I'm hopeful, for a half day, hopefully the cost is fairly manageable, and then we can handle that out of our local home fund administrative costs. So still finalizing those details as well, but that would be my hope that we can do that. So that's where we're at on our retreat update.
Great. More to come in January. Awesome. That sounds good. Great. Any questions from members about the retreat or anything before we move on to good of the order? All right. Well, that's our next and our final agenda item is good of the order. I don't have anything from my neck of the woods, but if anyone else has good of the order to share, and staff also, if you have good of the order to share, feel free. Robert?
Yeah, I might, I want to make sure I say this right. There's a lot of details, so I might end up asking Jacinda to step in and talk a little bit about it. But we renewed our homeless emergency last night, but we also, thanks to the wonderful staff at Olympia for putting this together in such a quick turnaround, we had passed a emergency around affordable housing last night. And there are many really cool parts of this, trying to get affordable housing moving forward by putting staff that can move the approval process ahead, working on a grant program to get the fees waived. There's a whole bunch of really cool stuff in there. And if we're ever a policy board, these are the types of things that we could share with each other. And it's easy to change the names on the documents. Control find is a very easy function. All I recommend is control find replace, and that's why we're all partners, right? So if you want more details on that, I can share you the link. If Jacinda wants to talk a little bit about it, that's cool. If she doesn't want to, that's cool too, because she was up late as we were talking about it. So yeah, we're very excited about this. And I have one other small thing. I met with the Thurston County Home Fund, or Thurston Home Fund, not Home Fund. What's it called? The Home Trust on Saturday, and they're looking to expand. They're looking to get into building and not just buying and creating housing in their supply, but they're expanding as a partner in the community. So yeah,
that's great. Yeah, if you would be able to send the link, maybe staff could just send it out to the council so that we just have a link to the text. That would be great for us to just sort of share around. And I apologize. I do have, I guess, one sort of good of the order thing is I believe there is a contributing member of our council who will be phasing off the Regional Housing Council starting next year as well. I believe Carolina, is this year going to be your final meeting with us as a representative from the county? Is that right? Have I heard that correctly?
It is, yes.
Yeah, well, I'd be remiss if we didn't also take some time to thank you for your contributions over the past 4 years. You've been an incredible partner to work with on these issues and have been really valiant in your efforts to make sure that these issues are prioritized and dealt with thoughtfully and meaningfully. And I don't think we would have had the same success over the past 4 years without your involvement and your stewardship. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will miss you, but we're sure that if it's still Councilmember Klaus, that she has big shoes to fill, obviously, with you cycling off the board, but you'll be missed.
Will you stay on as alternate, Carolina?
It will be Commissioner Rachel Dreon, who will be in as alternate.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Very good. So you are out of here. Dang.
Thank you, Michael, for those kind words. It's honestly been an honor and a pleasure to work with all of you over the past 4 years, and the staff have been just incredible and fantastic. And I've learned so much, and it's really just been a joy facing all of these tough issues together as a region, and now having the 2 advisory groups and having them be so strong. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Regional Housing Council becomes, and how those regional partnerships become even stronger as it becomes a little bit more stable. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity to serve alongside you these past 4 years.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Indeed.
Yeah. Any good of the order from your neck of the woods, Carolyn?
Well, we're getting closer on the our affordable housing project. This is a partnership with the Thurston Housing Authority on a 5-acre parcel that lot is selling to the city of Lacey for its original purchase price. So taking a haircut there in the name of affordable housing, which is nice. We're at the point now where we've authorized the director of lot and the city manager to negotiate a final contract. I am hopeful, but I can't guarantee that Lacey is going to just sell it for $1 to the housing authority, which would be really help them to be able to put more into the project, which is going to be 62 cottage style houses that will be, a chunk will go for seniors. And this replaces the project they were trying to do in Tumwater that fell through. And then the other part of it will be multifamily housing. So this is on Mullen Road, right near College Street and across from Camachin Middle School. That is a landmark for people, but it's like right on a bus line, across from a school. And we know it's going to be a high quality project based on some of the other things that the Housing Authority has done. So I am thrilled about this, because the big stumbling block for Lacey in developing affordable housing has been land. And now we've got this chunk. So yeah, really happy about that. So I'm hoping we'll wrap up pretty soon, because Housing Authority is under some constraints with deadlines to encumber federal funds.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. Any other good of the order before we adjourn? All right, seeing none. It's our last meeting for the year. We're closing out 2024. Thank you so much for all the work throughout the year. I think we've done a lot of good work here as an organization. So thank you all for your attendance and your work, and we'll see you in 2025.
All right.
Yay.
Thank you.
We're adjourned. Thanks.